Welcome to the love-infused ravings of Bach. Your own existence. I want to share with you this quote by Ramana Maharshi that I reread recently. I don't remember it at all. I read it years ago. But first of all, I want to say that I have found over the years, having matured into my own spiritual path, that I find myself less and less interested in reading other people's work. And it's mostly because of something that I would call spiritual autonomy, which is a term that Adyashanti introduced us to many years ago. And it's not as high and mighty as it sounds. And I didn't even understand it when I first heard it, and I've come to understand it. I'd have to ask him if this is actually what he meant, but I understand it as this quality of starting to trust ourselves so deeply that we don't really need to refer to other people's teachings to keep us moving along, or to help us recenter, or help us refine our inner stillness. They may talk about this in the East, in the Indian traditions, as sort of having contact with your inner guru, if you will. And, mine tends to be encapsulated by now, right? But always coming back to right now, checking in with right now, and using that as a doorway back to sanity, essentially, back to a place of remembering my true nature. I used to rely on books, which is so wonderful to have all these amazing teachers. I used to rely on books and retreats and songs and, recorded talks and whatnot. And thank God, right? This kind of material is so simple in a way, and it goes against our conditioning so profoundly that it's something we have to be exposed to. If we're really interested in being free, we have to expose ourselves to it over and over and over again, although essentially it's all saying the same things all the time. If you have a taste for it, you can never really have enough of it. It's almost like pizza or ice cream or something. No matter how many times you have it, you could always have more. So I find that's true with these spiritual teachings, the non-dual teachings, that if they resonate deeply with you, it doesn't matter how many times someone reminds you of them and guides you and gives you pointers and clues. They're always welcome and always incredibly helpful if we're feeling out of alignment, or feeling lost in the mind and lost in some kind of story and identity about ourselves and our lives. So the spiritual autonomy that Adya was referring to, I always interpret it as you get to a point where you are your own teacher, essentially, that the inner guru has come alive to such an extent that, and I know this has been true for me, that I can check in with myself. I know how to remember who I am when I get lost. And sometimes it's harder than other times, right? Sometimes it's harder, but it always seems like an interesting challenge. Can I just do it myself? Or do I have to, do I need help from someone who's further along the path or more deeply realized? And for many years, of course, I've also been using plant medicines to help me remember. And in a sense, that's a teacher, right? In the truest sense, it's a teacher. So that has been more my go-to than books for some years now. But I still find that every so often I want to check in, and I usually want to check in with the original teachers I had. And in this case, it's Ramana. Like I find, every few years or something, I go back and read a little bit of just his, I don't even know how many books there are about Ramana. I know there's some classics, and I think this one is called Be As You Are. And they're recorded, transcribed dialogues with him and disciples, and plus a few sort of introductions and essays by the author. And Ramana, his teachings were so sparse. His teaching was really silence and stillness and just being in his presence. And I've talked about this before, but eventually he gave a little bit of instruction to people because most people could not handle his simplest teaching, which was everything is the self. Everything is one thing. Everything is being. Everything is Buddha nature. Just drop these ideas, let go of all these ideas that there is anything else, essentially. So, he then kind of gave self-inquiry. Who am I? So looking into the question, who am I? And finding the source of thought and resting your attention there. But one of the incredible quotes I read from him just recently when I dipped back into Be As You Are. And it's so interesting. And like with any great book, with any great teaching or great novel, even, every time you read it, depending on where we are in our lives, something else will stand out that maybe we passed over the first time or had no resonance with us the first time because we weren't, in a sense, ready to hear that and understand it. So each time, we get something else from it, I find. And this time I read this one quote that just knocked my socks off, and I've been, however you want to say it, working with it for the last couple of weeks, pondering it, allowing it to just settle in me and do its work on me. And that quote is, someone asked him a question and he was responding to it, and he said, "If you know of your existence, how do you not know who you are?" And that really, to me, is an extraordinary pointer. Because as you sit here and you simply realize that you exist, right? Nothing more. All these fancy words that we can use for this sometimes can be confusing and hard to grok. But it's just that simple sense of existence, right? If you know that you exist, if you know your own existence, how is it you don't know who you are? And of course, he's saying they're one and the same, right? When you sit here and you just let the mind be still and just know your existence. You can't deny your own existence. And you don't need to go any further than that. You don't need to look any further than that. There's just this sense of existence. And again, we can use other words, whatever works, right? But in this case, all these words point to the same thing, but sometimes different words at different times really strike us and kind of give us that snap understanding of what these teachings are all about. Right? Existence is the same as now, presence. But existence is a certain word that we can't deny, right? If you know your own existence, how can you not know who you are? So just sit there and just, without thinking about it, without trying to understand it, see how simple that is to know I exist, right? It's completely self-evident. There's nothing you can deny about it, but you don't need to add anything to it either. Nothing needs to be added to it. No qualifier needs to be added to it. I am, right? I exist. My existence. And see if you can feel into that and feel that this is your primary sense of yourself. This sense of existence is who I am. Right? This is the thing I've always known. This is the only thing I've always known. Everything else has changed, but the sense of existence has always been so. And the mind will try to complicate it, of course. And the mind will try to come in and try to understand it with language and concepts and comparisons. And so, right, that's the work, is to let the mind settle. Just be quiet. We don't need to get complicated. It's this sense of existence, right? It's a sense feeling, presence, now, your true nature. Find it as often as you can and rest in it as long as you can. And when the mind tries to take it from you, let it go. Turn your attention away from the thoughts and let your attention just drop to. You don't even have to pay attention to your existence, right? Attention is part of your existence. Just let everything fall. There's a kind of steady attention when you're locked in, essentially, but it's effortless, right? Existence is effortless. Keeping your attention from wandering is the effort. But existence itself is effortless, of course. So, once again, if you know your own existence, which you can't deny, right? You know that you exist. If you know your own existence, how can you not know who you are? Just this. Just this. Let yourself go.